Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to introduce my friend and colleague, Mary Anderson Ford. We're going to have a little chat around chapter 3 in the book, and that is the merchandiser role and its evolution. So, hello, Mary. Lovely to see you again.
Hello, hello.
Perhaps we could start by you introducing yourself and telling everybody what you've been up to over your career.
Hi, I'm Mary Anderson Ford, known by those who know me well as simply Math, nothing like a few initials. I started my career working in vinyl merchandising within a jewellery business and got to know the ropes of how to run a retailer from working for a small business where you get involved in lots of things. Moved on then to start working in recruitment. I've spent the last 15 years recruiting for merchandisers, pretty much primarily. 95% of what I do is within merchandising. In that time, I've met people who were allocators when I first started, who are now merchandising directors, people who were senior merchandisers who are now CEOs. So there's a lot of people in this industry who I've watched their careers and helped shape their careers along the way. In addition to merchandising recruitment, I seem to be a little bit of a sort of rent-a-gob on the subject of retail and regularly get involved in talking about the retail industry, whether it's on TV news or whether it's writing columns for Draper's Magazine, for example. So retail is my passion. Merchandisers are my favourite. Yes, that's right, any wannabe buyers. Merchandisers rock. Yeah, I definitely have some very interesting observations as to how the role of the merchandiser has changed in 15 years, and of course how it's come on in the 15 years before that as well.
Absolutely. The one thing that I'm always struck with is the amount of change that has happened. I mean, you've quoted 15 years, and absolutely, the speed of change is huge. If you then go back 20, 30 years, of course.
You're sort of with an abacus at that point.
Absolutely, indeed. Do you think with all the change that's going on, the core merchandising role has changed, or is it still pretty much embedded in what its rationale was?
I mean, the rationale is the same. The rationale is let's make as much profit as we possibly can. Let's make as little loss as we possibly can. And let's drive a commercial production process. And that piece is the same. What has changed and what is changing even year by year, I mean, heaven forbid what's going on as we speak today during the pandemic, you know, these merchandisers needing to control the stock is something required more than ever, and yet somehow they're all being made redundant. Just such a cruel fact at a time when you need to control your stock even more is where you also need to control your headcount and therefore, you know, cut those costs. The role of the merchandiser certainly is about the numbers side of the product. The buyer, the designer, of course, is the creative, the look and feel of the collection. So you've got those two pieces, and they're always going to be responsible for those sections. I think what's changing so much, and what we're seeing excitingly changing, is that as the demands of the consumer are changing, so the role has to change. Ecom has brought about a whole load of new skills. You know, no longer is that human abacus, as I've always called it, go and cut it. Yes, they need to be good at maths. Of course they do. They can't be responsible for spreadsheets if they're not noticing that there's massive numerical errors on their documents. That's an essential and will always be an essential. But what we've got, instead of just that kind of financial mathematical brain now, is more of a sociological, a psychological approach. Somebody who potentially understands a little bit more about the consumer psyche, and somebody who can really understand the product. The merchandiser is looking after what's going on in the distribution centre, talking to what's going on in the marketing department. Of course, they're still working with the finance department. They're doing much more operationally with what's going on in the stores as well. And of course, as the merchandising piece, which was always just one function, has moved to the ecom team, the wholesale team, the international team, the branch merchandising team. This is what's so exciting about merchandising, is depending on what your personal interest is, there's something for you within merchandising. So the role has gone from this to this.
Absolutely. I really like the idea that there's a there's a degree of anthropology now, there's sociology, there's psychology. I mean, I'm a great believer in context. If you know what the context is, if you know what the world around you is doing, it makes your decisions so much more relevant, I guess, for the current moment of time. And I would totally concur with you. I think the role is getting broader in its scope. I hate to use the word basic, but the basic core role is the same, but it's the nuance with which you do it which has changed. And that makes me wonder there about the soft skill set of merchandisers. That must also have, rather than being an operational functional change, there must be a soft skill change as well.
I think so, yeah. And I think that the personality of a merchandiser has had to evolve. Whereas back in the day, the buyer was king, the merchandiser would just subserviently sit there and just reassess the numbers because the buyer said, I bought all these things, darling, you must change the numbers. That's the merchandising era that you know, of course, James.
Yes.
You know, that's not how the relationship is anymore. The relationship between the buyer and the merchandiser is now much more in unison. And I think that if you've not got that harmony and that perfect tie, you can't run a successful department. So no longer do we have Eva buyer and Quiet Little Mouth merchandiser. That's moved into more of a partnership. And whereas before the merchandiser was known for being calm and quietly confident and diplomatic, and the buyer, of course, was the opposite of all of those things, I think that everyone's had to realise they've got to come together to be able to form what they're doing. And because the merchandiser is having far more involvement in other parts of the business, the buyer potentially is working in a more narrow way. Potentially the buyer or designer, depending on what sort of business setup it is more involved in making sure that the brand's handwriting is always being protected. You know, we're at All Saints. Does this look like an All Saints piece? You know, we are working for Phase 8. Does this feel like it has the Phase 8 vibe? Whereas the merchandiser is taking on so many more functions, as is the way that retail is changing. You know, this is a more, it's almost like a kind of commercial analyst or a head of commercial piece.
Yes.
And that's what's interesting about merchandising. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see different titles coming through for merchandisers.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, of course, Frasers Group have only just announced they are changing all their titles, moving away from buying and merchandising into commercial. I forget all the individual names, but commercial featured, I think, in all of them. There was commercial trader, commercial analyst.
And that's right, it should be, because it is a commercial function. What annoys me about Frasers Group, though, James, and is that our friend Mike Ashley, he doesn't believe in merchandising. He had very few of them operating in the various brands he owned before he started to buy the whole high street. And that's why I don't think he has the understanding or the respect for what a merchandiser can do. You know, his instant cuts he made at House of Fraser were in that department. And it was like, well, hang on a minute. You have to look at the stats here. Famously, I always quote, back in the day, John Lewis was doing very well, thank you very much. Then they introduced merchandising and suddenly rocketed. Because guess what? If you're actually analysing what's being sold, forecasting what's needing to be sold, and clearing the stock effectively, you're actually going to make more money. So I think that what we're seeing with Frasers, great title, but let's make sure they're doing the right role.
Absolutely.
Anyway, that's my personal bugbear at the moment. I feel frustrated when a company doesn't appreciate the merchandisers, because in my opinion, a merchandiser sits at the very heart of the wheel, that is the cog of a head office. And it's a spider's web. It's the merchandiser that feeds out to every single part of the business, and they are integral.
Absolutely. I can always remember when I was working at House of Fraser, possibly one of my best connections was with the store manager in Bournemouth, who had that commercial on the ground retail operations mindset. She knew her local market, and she knew when we were getting things wrong. But she also saw opportunity. And together, I was head of merchandising on children's wear at the time. I had known her for some time, and she just phoned me up one day and said, look, James, why don't you just come down to Bournemouth? I've got an idea and I want to talk to you. And the vision that she had for her store in her local market.
Mm.
She didn't have to provide me with lots of mood boards and Gantt charts and all these sort of things. She
Yeah.
just said, look, this is how I see it. Go and have a look around the town, come back, and we'll have lunch and we'll work something out. And we actually came up with an incredibly innovative way of transforming the way that we traded children's wear within that
And that
store.
got rolled out to the other stores as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that idea that I don't want to belittle buyers and designers, but I do, and vision is very important. I think what you said about, All Saints, is this an All Saints piece, is really what the buyer is, the core of the buyer role.
Yes.
But vision, of course, and innovation goes at different speeds, and sometimes ranges can be pushed too hard. And what I see with the merchandising role is, I don't know whether it was you who said it or whether it was somebody else, but there's, I was always struck by referencing visual literacy. It's seeing the numbers on a page, it's budgeting, it's markdown plans, it's stock plans, it's flow of stock, but it's also seeing that in a color shape and seeing it in a style shape. Yeah. And I think that is where the merchandising role is therefore at the heart of a retail business, and it's almost like a spider's web.
It is. It's about having that ability to analyse numbers. But the quote, and it was me that said it, that's a quote from Judith Langham, who back in the day was merch director at Warehouse.
Yes, I know Judith very well.
And she said, I don't look at, as the Wizzy at spreadsheet, I don't look at that and see numbers, I look at that and I see product. So yes, that's a Langham quote, that one, and it makes perfect sense. I think ultimately we do need to make sure that a buyer has a little bit of a commercial brain and a merchandiser has a little bit of a creative brain. And I think that, they can't knit themselves together properly if they don't understand each other's worlds. So yeah, as you say, the soft skills, I think, are definitely
Absolutely. So with all of this, where's it going to go? Where put on your visionary hat now. Where do you think we're going to be by 2030?
Okay, so 10 years on, my goodness, I think we're definitely going to be dealing with a different situation with the impact of artificial intelligence. I think that AI has a function. I think that you can program into any kind of AI documentation technology that maybe the weather's doing X, Y, Z, and that therefore a supermarket will need more barbecue coals, more bottles of Pimm's, more pita bread and more hummus. And I think we all know that on certain sunny days you can do that. You can do that only so far in advance because, of course, in Britain the weather changes so dramatically. But what you can never do with AI, beyond forecasting continuity lines, yes, we can expect we're going to sell the plain black trouser, the black court shoe, the white vest top, the classic bras, knickers, etc. There are certain sales patterns. When it comes to fashion and when it comes to how weather impacts the fashions, how the mood in the nation impacts fashion, if we're going through a miserable time, heaven forbid, recently we've all been spending money on more loungewear, that wouldn't have been forecast, and businesses would have had to move quickly to get in the sort of clothing we want to be wearing. Equally, when the mood of the nation is high, whether it's through a royal wedding, a baby arrival, the Olympics, whatever it might be, again, a little bit of a boost in everybody's spirits, and people are buying different things. They're buying more colourful things, for example. All of these things are where we do need a human being. And I do think that while AI is going to be something we'll be just rolling with by 2030, I think that there's still that creative piece that will never be replaced by a computer. What else is going to happen beyond that? Well, the other thing I think is going to happen is that where at the moment we're seeing huge cuts, a massive bloodbath in terms of redundancies, businesses going into administration, whether thanks to what was happening anyway as a result of the rise of e-com, the lowering of interest in shopping physically in shops, and obviously so much has happened because of the pandemic. I think that all of the cuts that have been being made are almost going to be needing to be reversed in a few years' time, because of course businesses had spent so long building their departments, saying there's the core merchandiser, there's the branch team, there's the wholesale team, there's the international team. What they've done now is they've stripped it all back down, so it's a generalist in all the roles. Where's the specialists gone? Because a specialist mind for international merchandising is a beautiful thing, and something that businesses were harnessing and saying this is a fantastic thing, it's allowing us to grow our business all over the world. That's all gone. So I think give it a few years, we're going to see it turn itself around again, and they will be back recruiting those specialists because they know that that's the way to make the most amount of profit. Right now, everyone needs to save money. That's why it's happened. But I think we'll see that come around again.
I think so too. I think it's very interesting that one of the good things about the world today is that technology and the freedom and the economic freedoms that we have to open and close businesses as we need to does lead to a great deal of innovation. And with innovation comes new ways of doing things, but also becomes new emerging business model types and approaches to retail. And the concept of having a generalized merchandiser role in a fragmented, highly individual set of different business types makes no sense at all.
No.
And I think I agree with you long term. And this comes back to the idea of context. If we understand the context of the world and right size what we do and the businesses we operate within that context, I think we'll start to find, I hate to say a mutation of the merchandiser role, but I think it will get broader still, and its scope and opportunity will get broader as well.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and it's been incredible to watch it.
I know.
Recently, never mind over the years that I've done it and the years that you've done it. It's fascinating to watch it evolve. You know, it's a living thing. And that, I think, is what makes it so exciting as a career path. And that's why it breaks my heart to think that there'll be people watching this video who are thinking about moving into a career in retail, in merchandising, who potentially a few years ago were full of excitement about it. And now their parents are like, I don't know if it's going to be the right thing to be doing. Have you seen all these people are losing their jobs? You know, are we losing faith in retail? I understand if people might be. However, I'm absolutely confident that there will always be a place for shops, and there will always be a need for the merchandiser or the commercial or whatever it might be that they end up being called, because, you know, this is what drives the business. This is the commercial head of what makes a business a success and what makes a collection a success. So yeah, I feel like there's a bright time ahead, even though we can't see it at the moment.
Absolutely. So to pulling all this together, we've talked about the future, we've talked about the emerging roles, we've talked about the role of technology and AI. I'm going to put you on the spot now, the billion-dollar question.
Are you going to give me $1 billion?
It depends whether you get the answer right, doesn't it?
Okay.
I have always had at the back of my mind that a merchandiser is perfect CEO material, simply because of the breadth of the role and the people that they influence and are influenced by.
Yes.
With that in mind, what do you see as a career trajectory from entry-level allocator or distribution assistant or branch merchandiser up to CEO? What sort of timescales, what sort of roles are we
Right, well, firstly, get your $1 billion out, because I can do this one. I've always said the same thing. So many of our managing directors and CEOs have come from merchandising. Of course they have. They've grasped so much of the business. And I would say that into the future, we're going to see that the perfect person to become a CEO hasn't just worked up one thread of merchandising. They haven't just worked on footwear. They haven't just worked on core merchandising. They've dabbled in core merchandising, and they've done wholesale, and they've done international, and they've done e-com, and they've developed experience across menswear, women's wear, children's wear, accessories, homeware, because that's going to give them the fully rounded shape. I think it's absolutely what we're going to continue to see. And that's why I think everyone should work in merchandising.
Absolutely. And in terms of timescales, how how long do you think it takes to get to that?
It's coming through quicker than it ever it's coming through quicker than it ever used to. You know, it was back a while ago. I remember having a couple of people that I knew who were both 30 years old and were both head of merchandising, earning 100k. Therefore, they'd done that from coming out of university in the space of 9 years. That was super speedy. I think that we are seeing a faster pace of career path, and there's two reasons for that. First one is anyone working within e-commerce seems to be being elevated at such speed in their career. They can move to a head of position within even 6 years. So I think firstly, it's because skills that are in demand are very niche, and that's why it's happening quicker. The other thing is the personality type of our new generation. You know, it's our, what are they? Are they Gen Z or are they Gen X?
Yes, we're into Gen Z now.
It's the Gen Z personality. They've grown up being told they can do what they want. They've grown up being told to be as bolshy as they want. You know, they grew up watching The Weakest Link, where Anne Robinson was as rude as she wanted to be. And they think that that's how they can conduct themselves. Alan Sugar, you know, they got nothing on him. They are really ready to be feisty and to fight for their own career. And whereas before, it's like, well, the salary's 25,000. I'm not taking 25,000. I've done a degree, you know. Okay, all right, well, so is everybody else applying. No, you're not getting 30,000, but then they fight for it, and then they get it. So I think we're actually going to see a much faster pace, whereas normally a head of merchandising might be somebody who's in their mid to late 30s, for example. That would be your standard, who's developed that sort of 10, 15-year career path. So I think it's going to be quicker. And I think there's going to be more money to make as a result of it.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Well,
can I have my $1 billion now?
You can indeed. It's in the post. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful catching up with you. And for everybody watching the video, Mary's contribution to the book is in chapter 3, where we talk about the merchandising role. Thank you. Lovely to see you, Mary. And let's catch up again soon.
Always. Take care. Bye, everyone.